The storm was merciless that night. The rain lashed against the glass with such fury it seemed as though the heavens themselves were grieving. Every gust of wind rattled the shutters, every rumble of thunder made the walls tremble. Inside the small cottage, however, there was warmth. James Carter sat before the fire, the flames painting restless shadows across his tired face. The crackle of the burning log should have soothed him, but tonight even firelight felt uneasy. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring into the embers as if they held answers to questions he dared not ask. Across the room, his wife Clara hummed a soft tune, her hand resting protectively on the gentle curve of her belly. She was 7 months with child, and though the storm outside howled like some angry beast, her song was calm, steady, and filled with light. They thought it was just another night. Just another evening of quiet and waiting. But then, 3 desperate knocks split the air. Not polite taps. Not a neighbor seeking shelter. These knocks were sharp, urgent, like fists pounding for life itself. James and Clara froze. Their eyes met across the firelight. Clara's humming stilled. The warmth of the cottage seemed to shiver away, replaced by an unspoken dread. James Carter had grown accustomed to silence. Silence was easier than regret. Easier than remembering the children whose laughter he once knew but whose faces had faded with the years. He had told himself he had buried the past, sealed it away with broken vows and bitter mistakes. But the past had found him. Not as memory. Not as guilt in the dead of night. No, tonight the past came knocking. The door creaked open, hinges moaning against the storm. And there, framed in the dim light, stood 2 small figures. A boy, no older than 8, his arms wrapped tightly around a girl of perhaps 5. Their clothes clung to their thin bodies, soaked through. Water dripped from their hair, pooling on the floorboards. But it wasn't the storm that pierced James' heart, it was their eyes. Hollow. Hungry. Afraid. He knew those eyes. Daddy? The boy's voice cracked, fragile as splintered glass. James' throat locked. His world tilted. He had imagined reunion 100 different ways, dreams where he lifted them into his arms, where forgiveness flowed like water. But not like this. Not with ribs sharp under tattered cloth. Not with lips trembling from cold and hunger. He stepped back, shame cutting through him like a blade. He wanted to speak, but words died in his chest. It was Clara who moved first. Without hesitation, she crossed the floor, her robe trailing across the wet boards. She lowered herself despite the swell of her belly, kneeling eye level with the children. Her voice came soft, breaking with compassion, "Oh, my sweethearts, come inside. You're safe now." The children hesitated. They had learned that not every open door offered safety. But something in her tone, gentle, unwavering, drew them forward. They stepped across the threshold. And for the first time in years, James' home filled with the sound of small footsteps once more. Clara moved quickly, with a determination born not of panic but of instinct. She draped woolen blankets over the children, their small shoulders nearly disappearing beneath the fabric. Their shivers softened, though their eyes still darted about, wary. She ladled broth from a pot over the fire, spooning it carefully into their mouths. At first, they ate like creatures starved, gobbling too fast, coughing as they swallowed. But Clara steadied them, murmuring encouragement, wiping their mouths with the hem of her sleeve. Tears welled in her eyes as she saw how thin they were, how each spoonful seemed to breathe life back into them. James stood apart, leaning against the wall. His fists tightened at his sides. Guilt gnawed, relentless. He should have known. He should have searched for them. But shame had kept him distant, and now the proof of his failure sat shivering in his kitchen. Finally, he forced out the words. His voice was rough, broken. "Where's your mother?" The boy glanced at his sister, then lowered his gaze. His lips pressed tight, unwilling to betray what love still lingered. It was the little girl who whispered, she doesn't give us food anymore. The silence was deafening. The crackle of the fire seemed too loud, too cruel in contrast. Clara's hand froze mid-stroke as she brushed the girl's hair. James shut his eyes, shame pressing heavy as stone. That night, Clara tucked the children into her own bed, smoothing the blankets over their fragile forms. She sang softly until their breathing slowed, until their fists unclenched from fear. She and James lay awake on the couch, exhaustion heavy but sleep refusing to come. James stared into the ceiling's shadows, while Clara rested her head against his shoulder. Neither spoke of what it meant, of how their world had shifted. But when, in the dark, a small voice trembled from the bedroom. "Can I call you Mama?" Clara rose without hesitation. She slipped into the room, knelt beside the bed, and gathered the girl into her arms. "Yes, my love," she whispered, pressing a kiss to the child's damp hair. "You can." And for the first time in weeks, perhaps months, the children slept in peace. In the days that followed, life in the cottage began to change. Slowly at first, small sounds returning. The clatter of spoons. The sudden burst of childish giggles. The boy chasing threads of yarn that Clara had left behind. James found himself watching, torn between joy and sorrow. Their laughter was like music, but it reminded him too keenly of what he had lost, and how fragile it all was. Then one afternoon, peace shattered. A pounding, fiercer than the storms, rattled the door. James opened it, and there she was, Lydia. His former wife. The children's mother. Her eyes were wild, bloodshot. Her hair clung in damp strands. Clothes torn, breath sharp with drink. "You think you can steal my children?" she spat, her voice laced with venom. James stood rigid, every muscle taut. "They came to me starving, Lydia. What were you thinking?" "They're mine," she screamed, shoving past him into the room. "Mine." The children shrank back, clinging to Clara's skirts, their small bodies trembling. Clara held them close, her own heart pounding but her arms steady. The boy's voice broke as he stood before his sister, defiant though his knees shook. "We don't want to go back. Mama takes care of us now." The words sliced through the air. Lydia's body recoiled, staggered as though struck. She looked from James to Clara, her eyes darting, landing on her children, on the safety they found not in her, but in another woman's arms. For a heartbeat, the room held only silence. Then Clara stepped forward. Her voice was calm, firm, without malice. "Lydia. They will always be your children. Nothing will change that. But right now, they need food. Shelter. Love. If you can give that, you are welcome here. If not, let them heal." Lydia's lips trembled. Her eyes, once blazing, filled with tears. Anger unraveled into shame. She turned abruptly, stumbling toward the door. "Fine," she whispered hoarsely. "Keep them." And she vanished into the night, swallowed by the rain. Weeks passed. Slowly, the scars began to fade. The children's cheeks rounded with color, their eyes lit with wonder again. Their laughter filled the cottage as naturally as the morning sun. James watched with awe. He saw how Clara poured herself into them, feeding, teaching, comforting. She gave not because she had to, but because love compelled her. One evening by the fire, Clara gathered them close. The girl rested against her shoulder, the boy sat at her knee, and the warmth of the flames flickered across their faces. "Your mother gave you life," Clara said softly, brushing back the girl's curls. "But love is what makes a family. And here, you will always have it." The children's small hands entwined with hers. Their eyes shone with trust. Then came a morning bright with birdsong. Clara's cries filled the cottage, not of sorrow, but of labor. Hours of struggle, James's prayers whispered like a broken hymn. And at dawn, a new cry pierced the air, their child, red-faced, alive, beloved. James held the newborn close, tears streaming unchecked. He looked at Clara, exhausted but radiant, and then at the children gathered around her. Their eyes wide, their hands reaching out to touch the tiny miracle. And in that moment, he understood. Family was not the bloodlines that bound or the papers that named. Family was sacrifice. Family was love poured out freely. Family was Clara. Motherhood is not measured by the blood that runs through veins, but by the love poured into empty hands, the sacrifice made in silence, the courage to care when it costs the most. On that stormy night, two hungry children found more than shelter. They found a mother.